I mix what I like, what I like.
I mix what I like is exactly where you want and need to be. I mix what I like, organic, vegan, soul food from your immediate diet. Live healthy. Live healthy.
I mix what I like, what I like.
We're here on I Mix What I Like. You may check us out on iMiXWHATiLiKE.org, where you can see all these other shows and what my daddy likes and other cool things.
What's up, world? Welcome back to I Mix What I Like right here at I Mix What I Like. Dr. Todd, Stephen Burroughs, Jared Ball. Happy to be your host. Todd, how you feeling, man?
I always laugh a little bit hearing your intro because I remember when your little girls were that small and now they're on the way to college.
The voice you heard there is now in college.
It's in college, you know.
It's crazy.
I remember when this beard used to be all black. I remember it's just what it is.
Well, it kind of hit me after the show last time. We had been talking about how we've been in association for 30 years now. And well, wait,
about 25,
right. 25 years. Right. Which is right. Because you had moved to College Park 30 years ago. Right. So, yeah. So welcome to those joining us live. Please do like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, join the channel. All the links are in the show description, including the link to the work of Dr. Todd Stephen Burroughs. I do understand that our colleagues over at Black Liberation Media are doing a live as well. So if folks want to go back and check that out and come back and see this later, there's no harm, no foul. And if those want to go and want to stay here and go check that out later, no harm, no foul. So, but timing is what it is. And, you know, here we are. So we did want to continue this discussion we're having about the Second World War. Well, really about comic books, propaganda, cartoons, really about capitalist propaganda post the Second World War, influencing a sort of post Second World War return to the extent that the United States has shifted away from a focus on corporate driven capitalism to sort of state driven industry for the war effort. The corporate world wanted to as in their language, as Fons Wolf writes, to intellectually reconquer America. So that's the context of these conversations. Please check parts 1 and 2, also linked in the show description, or will be. And yeah, so how would you like to start? Because we initially started with we were going to talk about SchoolhouseRock and their Money Rock series.
And I want to get there, but I think we got to walk through the 20th century to get there. But
and I got something. I do have something I'm very excited to show you. I mentioned it before we started, but yeah.
Black press thing. See, as a Black press historian, we got to start with the Black press, and then we'll kind of do an outline of how we get to a Schoolhouse Rock and other these 1970s, late 60s, early 70s products. But please, let's start with the Black press, please.
Well, I was just looking at a couple of things, just looking stuff up, and I found this article this morning. I haven't even had a chance to finish it in its entirety. So so I'm happy to have you sort of give your first run of thought on its accuracy. But from the American Journalism Journal, The Art of Propaganda, CharlesAlston's World War II editorial cartoons for the Office of War Information and the Black Press. So you can see why, you can see it by title. I was immediately gonna check this out.
You said this is an American journalism?
Yeah, American Journalism from 2004.
Now, American Journalism, for the uninitiated, is one of the top communication journals, and it is the journal for newspaper historians, American newspaper historians. So this is a serious topic, and that name looks familiar. I think he is a major scholar in American newspaper.
Harry Amana. I'm not familiar with his work, but so this is an introduction in many ways. But The abstract here says at least one scholar has theorized that the black press during World War II adopted a pseudo-militant accommodationist mode to appear militant to its black readers, while at the same time appeasing the U.S. government by supporting the war.
Oh,
the
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Let's get in it. Let's get in it. Keep going.
The cartoons of black artist CharlesAlston produced for the U.S. Office of War Information allowed the editors to play this game perfectly. Alston's cartoons supported the national position on the war, and in doing so are examples of government propagandistic art targeted directly to a black audience. This study examines Alston's OWI editorial illustrations for their themes and messages. So just a little bit that I've highlighted here to summarize the first half of the article that I've read, and I will have to extend this. I'm definitely going to finish it and dig into its citations and everything else. But CharlesAlston,
I love the fact that this article is published in a journal whose editor emeritus is Patrick Washburn, who wrote the definitive history of the black press during World War II. So he understands this analysis. And the fact that they're printing this analysis shows that he gets the complexity of how black publishers operated in World War II. And see, this is the World War II era, Dr. Ball knows this, is one of my favorite topics. And so this is right up my wheelhouse. This is right up my wheelhouse. So let's go.
So the more than 100 illustrations produced by black artist CharlesAlston for the U.S. Office of War Information during World War II are singular and unique in the history of the black press in the United States. And Amana argues here that they can be said to be rare documentation of successful government propagandistic inclusion into the free press. That because they weren't overt and they were satisfying both the interests of the press and the government, they were he's saying it's a successful government propagandistic inclusion. The black, and then again, and I definitely want to get into this point, but the black press during World War II adopted a pseudo-militant accommodationist mode in order to appear militant to its unhappy readers, using the Double V campaign that I know you can talk a lot about, while at the same time appeasing the U.S. government by supporting the war. Now, then the article goes into a little bit of biographical stuff about Alston, but then talks about a comparison between what papers like this here, the Chicago Defender and the black press were doing, and what the government wanted Alston to counteract within the black press. Because a lot of people in the black press, and then the article talks a little bit about the debate within black America historically, going all the way back to the American Revolution, to the Spanish-American War, where there has always been this ongoing discussion in the black community as to, do we fight with these people or against these people? And here we see that playing out in the pages of the Chicago Defender again, where you got the lynching rope and debt peonage, voting for whites only, and then you're at the same time, as it's depicting here, you want us to go fight for you. So you got someone being lynched here, and you have someone, and this actually reads lyncher on his shoulder. And he's reading a paper talking about so-called Jap atrocities to American soldiers while he's hanging a black man over here. So this is what the American government is saying. We need to address this black press problem. But we want to do it in a way that I think is wildly relevant for 2024. We want to do it in a way where we use black art and black communicators in nominally black spaces to target black audiences with a message that is ultimately very white. And that's for my particular lane here, but or line of attraction or connection to this. When the United States entered the World War in 1941, blacks in the United States were engaged in a philosophical discussion that had begun 80 years earlier during the Civil War, whether to fight for a country that treated them as second-class citizens or worse. Again, they go through some of the discussion of that history. Du Bois's infamous Close Ranks article.
Why did Du Bois do close ranks? Do you remember?
Well, because he was working for he had a role within the American military. In the
rank.
He was offered a right. Exactly. There you go. Thank you. Right.
He was offered a rank.
That's
and
right.
Joe Spingard had ranks in the military. That's right.
Joe Spingard, who Steve Coakley will remind you is the white man whose name is as honored as the highest award I think you could get as an Omega, as a Q in the
whole Joe Spingard. If you go to my blog and you type in W.B. Du Bois and the Crisis, it was Spingard who was arguing with Walter White on how to kick Du Bois out of the NAACP. In 1934, when Du Bois, who was now an open Marxist, was calling for cooperatives, farming cooperatives, because the New Deal wasn't giving money to black people. See, that's right up to the issue today with the black farmers, right? And Du Bois called for open segregation in the Crisis. He called for segregation. He said black people should form their own cooperatives. And what's the point of integration if black people don't want to associate with themselves? That started a 6-month fight within the pages of the Crisis, where the NAACP had to openly say for the first time, we are an integrationist organization. Du Bois pushed them to do that. But all along, the memos between Walter White and Joe Spingard, like, we got to get this Negro out of here. And so they kick him out. Garvey is in Jamaica laughing. And what's really interesting is that, now to show you the complexity of this issue, David Levering Lewis, Du Bois's biographer, says that Du Bois did this purposely so that he could play ball with Atlanta University and show Atlanta University whether he was not a socialist radical. That's why he was calling for segregation. In other words, he pivoted to use the whole segregation thing as, I'm really for the status quo of it. And Lewis argues that he did that because he wanted the resources and the funding to do Black Reconstruction. Black Reconstruction finished
classic
at Atlanta University, and Du Bois and Lewis argues in his 2-volume autobiography of Du Bois that Du Bois did this purposely to set himself up with a very cushy position so he could finish Black Reconstruction. And to show you how this works, he basically told John Hope what he was going to do, what he was not going to do, and he stole the department's secretary. Now, I talked about in the chat that, secretaries are powerful, right? Because who was Tony Brown's secretary? And when he was at Howard founding the School of Communications, a young woman named Kathy Hughes. So who was Du Bois's secretary? A young woman by the name of Irene Diggs.
Oh, wow. Right.
And so this complexity, this pivoting that Du Bois and the Black press leadership does is very complex. That's why I'm glad you're bringing it up, and that's why I'm glad this article exists. Please continue, Dr. Ball. You put me in Disney World. I'm in Disney World right now. I'm walking around. I'm hugging Minnie.
Well, I told you, I confessed in the last live we did that this is all a plot to get you more involved. So I know what buttons to push. If I really need to get Todd involved, this is the lane. This is the avenue to get you.
Very important. This is the history I was trying to do for my doctorate. And I had to make a pivot because of money and time to go do the stuff I did on Black broadcasting. But this was the meat I was interested in as a grad student. Please continue with this great article.
So again, just some of the context that they lay out here in terms of that time. You mentioned Garvey. I mean, Garvey is developing his own press interests with the Negro world and whatnot. And then they talk about the rise of his efforts. Right. Around the Mussolini-led invasion of Ethiopia, which, as Robin Kelly writes here, the defense of Ethiopia did more than any other event in the 1930s to internationalize the struggle of Black people in the United States.
That's right.
So this is some of the context that is being built here, and I'm not doing it justice. So I can't make the article available for you but I would encourage. Well, actually, I got it through Google Scholar, so I'll leave it on them.
Available for everybody.
I'll put the link to the Google Scholar, and then you all can deal with all the rest. These events publicized in the Black press, that is the internationalization and the Pan-Africanism after the invasion of Ethiopia, may have helped its readers to begin to accept war participation within a paradigm that posited race as the central factor that should determine whether whether and how blacks would support the war. So what I think is being described here is that as more of issues of race started to play out in these world wars, and as Gerald Horne has even written about the impact of the war against Japan on the racial consciousness and black nationalism of black people in the United States, this is all factoring into the kinds of messages coming out in the black press that the federal government was concerned about. And by the end of June of 1942, at least 6 other federal agencies had joined the FBI in investigating the black press: the Justice Department, the Post Office Department, the Office of Facts and Figures, the Office of Censorship, the U.S. Army, and the newly created Office of War Information. So because of that racialized consciousness, and then having that become an avenue from which, or a platform from which, there would be criticism of U.S. war efforts, the black press becomes a target of federal agencies for surveillance, containment, or worse. So then the author goes into a little bit of the the theoretical approach of social realism, to talk about, to sort of situate where Alston found himself. And the author summarizes, quoting writer David Shapiro, that social realism is opposed to the ruling class and its mores, predominantly selects as its subject matter the negative aspects of life under capitalism: labor conflicts, poverty, the greediness of capitalists, the nobility of long-suffering workers, etc. Socialist realism, as it has developed in the Soviet Union, supports the ruling class as the form of government. It selects as its subject matter the positive aspects of life under socialism: happy, cooperating workers, the beauty of factory and countryside, well-fed, healthy children, and so on. Mexican social realism, somewhere between these two, shows both the struggle of the people to gain control of the means of production and some of the fruits of that power. Alston, according to Armand's drawings for the black weeklies, do not fall into any of these categories described by Shapiro. None of his images depict the ugly contradictions of U.S. capitalist society for blacks, nor is there any imagery of confrontations between workers and management. Indeed, his pictures involving workers usually include blacks and whites in cooperative endeavors and with each other, even with management. But Alston knew and respected the work of Mexican social realism muralist Diego Rivera, and he may have borrowed that part of Rivera's work that dignified workers and peasants, leaving out entirely any of the conflicts rife in U.S. society in the 1930s. Right. Now, Todd, this fits perfectly with what we were talking about when you joined me on part 2, and what I was trying to point out in part 1 of this discussion, that what the goal, and Franz Wolf, I'm leaning a lot on her work here, admittedly. What this is coming at a moment in time where well, actually, that's not the point. What I was actually saying about this comparison was that on Labor Day, this country's rebranding of Labor Day, right? And people in the comments, shout out to you, who pointed out that I should have also made the comparison that I didn't make, that Labor Day is developed to get people off of thinking about Internationalist Workers Solidarity Day in May Day.
Counteract May Day, right? Labor Day is the counteract May Day, right?
But I was focused on its messaging, which was much like what is being said here, that the American worker has contributed mightily to this great American society, and all of those contradictions of the labor struggle, we're just going to leave all that out. We're just going to ignore all of that and praise in general and vaguely the working person.
And that's what saw on Looney Tunes, they left out the entire labor movement from those Looney Tunes cartoons that we talked about in part 2.
Absolutely. So that's where we get to, this is just some, now this is where I didn't read past this part yet, so I'm just going to show you some of the art.
Those are the cartoons that
these are the cartoons, yes.
So what he's doing is he's doing it in the same style as J. Rogers.
No, you know what? I didn't even think about that, but that makes sense.
Connects with J. Rogers.
That does work. Yeah, you're right.
So he's doing a. See, I'm really J. Rogers. You know, I'm doing the same thing. So the eye will see it as the same thing. That's very smart.
Well, we see also the style that we get today with like Black History Month. or whenever the country wants to praise someone, we get a focus on some Black heroic figure whose heroism is connected to serving the state. So this is
and
a Navy military hero.
Yeah. I mean, CNN does a
that's what I'm saying.
The heroes, awards and all that. Right. It's nobody ever. They never choose anybody against the status quo.
No. And so this is what we, and then specifically as Aman is arguing, and I can't wait to actually finish the article.
Go ahead.
This is all done specifically to target, again, white messaging through Blackness to Black audiences, to get Black people to support the war. Yeah.
When you're done, trust me, I'm going to do at least 10 minutes on all of this.
All right.
This is all my favorite stuff.
So here's another one, another Black war hero. Yep, Benjamin Davis. So
Dory Miller, right.
Win the war, plan the peace.
Right, there it is.
The Double V campaign, all of that. So,
absolutely.
To your point about J.A. Rogers, yep, the style is
it's right there.
Haile Selassie, which makes sense given the Black connection to Ethiopia.
Right.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
So this is,
look at that.
So this is beautiful, because this specifically targets what Horn was talking about in his work on this issue, that as Black people saw the attack on Japan as an attack on world colored folks and colonized folks, this makes sense, because this is your savior, some savage so-called Jap is going to be your savior. So that's what I'm getting from this here. Like, this is.
And Dr. Burroughs, I watch a lot of geek things. I was just watching last night The Wonderful World of Disney back from the 50s, when they used to do those Tomorrowland and all these kind of different kind of shows.
Mm-hmm.
They did a whole Tomorrowland on rockets.
Oh, wow.
And one of the first things they showed was the dumb Japanese with their rockets and how that didn't work, and they did the whole Japanese stereotype. It was still the 50s, so they drew the Japanese stereotype from World War II, and then they were like, of course, later, when the white man took it over, and of course it was done more sophisticatedly in terms of the art. So you see this whole image right there.
And then look at this. Look at this. This is a Labor Day celebration poster from 1942. It says here, "Free labor will win," and there's obviously and it says that you see Axis is up here. They're targeting the wall of the. So they're saying this is, again, he's doing the whole pro-capitalist.
Right.
American labor is free. The American worker is the most powerful and free worker in the world. Yeah, this is wild. This is wild.
No, it's very. When I explain all of this, it's going to be very consistent, because
go ahead. Yeah,
right here is beautiful, because the Black press, because somebody wanted to interview me about Black media or whatever, and you want to talk about the compromises since Obama. I was like, no, the Black media has never not been compromised. It is always a negotiation with compromise.
I mean, Horn, speaking of Gerald Horn, he also has that book on that is so well done on an aspect of the Black press that I thought was funny that time. I got to go find that video where I showed Roland Martin completely missed the point in praising that book. But to the point.
You're talking about the book on Barnett and the Associated Negro Press?
Exactly, and that
was a fantastic book.
That book is fantastic.
That audience, like, if you want to understand the contradictions,
and that's what I'm talking about. To your point, it's always been compromised. That's right.
It's all about the compromises between how can you be a Black capitalist and a Pan-Africanist at the same time,
and it really don't work.
And where Lerone Bennett didn't have to deal with that until later. And then there's a big article on Dr. Ball's site about Lerone Bennett that I wrote, that if you want to read about Lerone Bennett. I will
put the link to this. Yeah, I will link it in here.
And how Lerone Bennett didn't have to deal with that until later, until he was kind of forced out of writing for Ebony and Jet and pushed up to being the editor, where he didn't have to deal with that. Johnson had to deal with that from day one.
Right.
And so all of these things make a lot of sense. I'm loving this so much. Keep going.
All right. No, so these are just some more of the pictures, that the art that he's drawing here. I guess looking to unify Douglas, Carver, and Washington is the.
Douglas, right.
Oh no, these were Liberty ship dedications. Okay, so I guess they named some of these after Carver, Washington, and Douglas.
Okay. I thought it was a handoff.
No, it's in order to keep the U.S. and Allied troops adequately stocked with supplies and munitions. Almost 3,000 prefabricated ships were mass produced during World War II. These Liberty ships were 441 feet long, 56 feet wide, and completed in about 70 days. So let's see, 17 or 18 of these ships were named after African Americans. In this panel, Alston depicts the spirits of the first 3 blacks for whom Liberty ships were named, with the news item explaining that 3 ships have been named for outstanding Negro Americans.
Yes.
So it's again an issue we're still dealing with today. Like, do we want our names on these things? Do we want Harriet Tubman's image and name on the FBI bill or the CIA building?
It is not accidental that it's during this exact period where a mess hall guy in the Coast Guard gets named as the first ever PR director of the Coast Guard. And back then, I think it was called, there was a name it was called. It was some sort of military journalist, or some sort of name that this young guy was given. But he was like the first person to be named as for the Coast Guard. And he would do press releases for the Coast Guard. And, you see the pictures of the young guy, and it's Alex Haley.
Wow. Oh, and by the way, Quaker Anarchist is right.
Chief journalist. That's what it was called. Chief journalist.
Professor Ball doing individualized fan service. No, I am a fan of Todd. Todd is I think, all jokes aside, is an unheralded powerhouse, intellectual powerhouse. So I am a fan. Whoops. I didn't mean to do that. What did I just do there? Sorry about that. I don't know what that was. Anyway, so yeah, no. So I'm unashamed in that. So yeah, but anyway, here we go back with the same thing we're seeing now. We just saw this past weekend. We saw LeBron James carrying the flag during the Olympics and all that kind of stuff. So it's the kind of black athletes carrying the U.S. propaganda through sport.
And Joe Louis, of course, as their way of not dealing
Charles
with Jack
Drew.
Johnson. Right.
That's right. Joe Louis is a great way of not dealing with Jack Johnson.
Right. It's all there.
Be ready to jump into their shoes. Black women, the victory corps.
Right.
The men are off at war. Women get into the factory, and here we have some more anti-Axis propaganda. Soviet Union, Hitler, and Mussolini, Hitler, and Japan. They hadn't turned on Soviet Union just yet. A couple years later, right? And Japan. Right. Just Alston was busy,
well paid, I'm sure.
So I'm definitely going to come back to that article. I have to finish it, and I want to check out a couple of the sources that are cited in there for more. But just found that early this morning. Thought it would be something we could work in, and it fits perfectly.
I'm so glad you did, because what I want to do right now, if I may.
Yeah,
I'm going to do about 5 minutes, maybe a little bit more, explaining the entire context of that article and how it fits in with the Black press. And if we want to talk some more about that, we can. And then when we're done with that, then we can talk about the development of 20th century popular culture in America, particularly popular culture in terms of recorded music, and how all of that leads to that, and the growth of American advertising leads to the kind of context that we get with the Schoolhouse Rock and with Sesame Street and with these other things that combine so many different propagandic elements that they become huge hits. Because people don't know that the person who created Schoolhouse Rock, or who allowed Schoolhouse Rock to be created, is rewarded with being the head of Disney. So we're going to get to that. But let's go to this first. Okay, I keep mentioning the same book because I'm not as up on the literature as I used to be, but I'm going to mention this book, and I always mention this book. And I love this book because its title is so innocuous. You don't know really the content of this book until you read it. And I think that's purposely done so that people will pick it up and read it and use it in their classes. Fred Carroll's Race News, Black Journalists and the Fight for Racial Justice in the 20th Century. It was published in 2017. I've mentioned this book several times on this program, talking with Dr. Ball and just in general. What is so important about that particular book? That book is the first book, if we don't count Theodore Vincent's work, all right? Theodore Vincent with the excellent Voices of a Black Nation, Political Journalism in the Harlem Renaissance, in which he publishes all of these early articles about Du Bois and Garvey and A. Philip Randolph, you know, all the way from 1919 roughly to the mid-30s, right? If we don't count Theodore Vincent's work, there really isn't a lot in the Black press, Black newspaper scholarship that talks about the ideological battles within the Black press. The Black press comes out of the 19th century, antebellum period. It starts out as an abolitionist press. Obviously, the abolition is slavery. And after the Civil War, it becomes a press of uplift and dealing with segregated life and creating within segregated life kind of a community development that's run by an elite. And that's what E. Franklin Frazier writes so eloquently about in Black Bourgeoisie. That book is an indictment of mid-20th century Black newspapers, because Frazier writes about 15 months before the movement starts, about 15 months, 2 years. Like he admonishes the students as to not being active, right? So, you never know the future. You got to be careful about what you write, because then you got to explain what you write is what you write in the time, because you don't know the future. Nobody knows the future. Not even E. Franklin Frazier knew the future. So when we get up to this point that Fred Carroll starts to document, we're dealing with an activist or an active socialist movements, communist movements, Pan-Africanist movements, not only Garvey, but the African Blood Brotherhood and all others, as well as the labor movement dealing with A. Philip Randolph. And all of these groups, all of them have an organ. An organ is an academic term for official newspaper, right? Broadcasting is still being developed. Film is king at this point. And broadcasting is being developed as a national medium and is about to be regulated. So Black people don't have access to either film or radio at this stage, but they do have access to printing presses. And so they all print organs, right? So to be a competitive Black newspaper, you couldn't ignore all of the radicals and all the socialists, because a lot of the energy that was happening in Black communities was happening there. And, you get the whole Spanish Civil War. I mean, again, I always say this, Dr. Ball is tired of hearing me say this, but this thing about Langston Hughes being a poet is just ridiculous. I mean, he may have written a couple of poems, but the man was a journalist. He covered the Spanish Civil War. He was being bombed in hotels with Ernest Hemingway. And his memoirs, which are not read, which they should be, but I know why they're not read, because his memoirs are travelogues. And I'm talking about I Wonder When I Wander in the Big Sea. They are travelogues where he literally traveled the world and wrote about the dark people in the world. And he talked about covering the Spanish Civil War. And the end of the first one talks about the beginning of World War II. And he's going, I can't believe we're going to have to defend this country now. He openly said it. Langston was such an amazing figure. I mean, he went, Dr. Ball remembers this when the Russians, we're talking about what's happening with Uhuru and Russian influence and all of this kind of stuff. Well, Dr. Ball remembers a period of time in which the Russians went and paid for a bunch of Black artists to travel across the sea to Russia to do a film about American racism. and for whatever reason, the film didn't happen or whatever, and Langston was kind of, in Russia saying, okay, should I go back home? I know what's there, or should I stay here? And he decided to stay. And what he decided to do was he decided to go travel the entire Asian continent, writing about the dark people, writing about the dark Chinese and all this amazing stuff in these two memoirs, I Wonder Where I Wander and The Big C. I mean, if you're teaching journalism and you're teaching Black journalism, there's no way you cannot use these books. But the reason these books are not heralded is because of the anti-capitalist, pro-socialist focus of a lot of it. And a lot of it that Langston himself has to disavow when he goes and puts together a book on famous Black Americans and refuses to put Du Bois in the book because he's afraid that McCarthy's going to come after him, which McCarthy did anyway. And Langston kind of sold out some of the Black movement. Some people never forgave him. Du Bois never forgave him. A lot of leftist communist luminaries never forgave him because he went up against McCarthy and kind of sold out, kind of went soft-soap under the McCarthy lights because he's a freelancer. He's worried about his next check. He's worried about his next paycheck. Now, it's a good thing we talk about the complexity of somebody like Langston, because what Langston represented in terms of everything I've just discussed is what happens in the Black press. So let's talk about the Black press pre-Pearl Harbor, and then let's talk about the Black press post-Pearl Harbor, and then let's talk about the Black press post-VJ Day. Now, those are three different Black presses, okay? So let's talk about the pre-Pearl Harbor Black press. The pre-Pearl Harbor Black press was a hotbed of intellectual activity. You had this guy who originally came from the left, who liked to be a contrarian, and eventually he became a rabid right-wing writer. Dr. Ball knows who I'm about to mention. George Schuyler. And Schuyler was burning up the editorial pages of the Pittsburgh Courier in the 30s and the 40s, writing these very provocative editorials. And I mean, entire op-ed pages would be people writing, attacking George Schuyler for whatever he wrote that previous week. Pittsburgh Courier, which had like 12 different editions across the country, their editorial page, they had like 30 active op-ed columnists, right? I mean, including people of other races. There was a guy who from India who wrote an Indian's View. I mean, so these were hotbeds of intellectual activity. And socialism, communism, Pan-Africanism, Black nationalism were argued in those pages. Even Adam Clayton Powell had a newspaper like this because he wanted to be in that argument and debate. His great newspaper is called The People's Voice. And he hired some Black communists to run it. Marvel Cook, Doxy Wilkerson. People who study the Black left know these names very well. They were in charge of Adam Clayton Powell's paper. Now, Adam only wanted the paper as a vehicle to jump from the city council office to the congressional office because they had created a congressional seat in Harlem, and Powell wanted it. So the newspaper was a vehicle for him to be a radical. Oh, and by the way, it's really funny. Because he was using the presses of PM. PM was a progressive evening newspaper. People who know the history of the left know about the newspaper PM. PM offered Powell the use of their presses. Because of that, when the Black press got word that there was this, Adam Clayton Powell was coming out with a paper to rival the Amsterdam News and the New York Age, they attacked him across the country. They called him Uncle Tom. They called him everything. They said, this is a white man's newspaper in blackface. That's what they called The People's Voice. All before it came out. Right? And then Powell comes out with this strong material, and then everybody loves him. And he's a full member of the Black press, publisher, everything. He even uses the People's Voice office as his councilman office hours. So people who would come to see him about issues dealing with the black community would come to the newspaper office to talk to him. And he wrote a column, by the way, called We Ain't Ready. And he would talk about things in the news that were satirical or things that showed that we were not prepared, etc. And so how active were these papers? Well, let me give you an example of what the People's Voice op-ed page looked like. All right, let's say we were looking at an edition of the People's Voice from 1942. The first thing we'd see is an investigative report on segregation in the military that would be so hot, the writer couldn't put his name on it for fear he'd get killed, he'd get lynched. So they would say, we got this dispatch about segregation and what's going on with the troops and these white cracker folks in the South beating up and lynching our troops, but we can't even put a name on it because our reporter will get lynched. Then we go to the op-ed page. What would we see on the op-ed page? Here was the op-ed page what the People's Voice looked like. W.V. Du Bois, Paul Robeson, and one of the most militant black activists, a young woman named Lena Horne. And Powell was publishing these people and being happy with Marvel Cook and Doxy Wilkerson pushing people to the left because that's what people were. See, this is an example now. And then, of course, you have the great Ollie Harrington, because I see you, QKR anarchist. You got to talk about Ollie Harrington during this era. Ollie Harrington, one of the great political cartoonists of the black press, who goes to the left, stays there.
So I was saving it, but just for clarity, Quaker Anarchist is asking any favorite black political cartoonists of this era you're speaking of about that you know of.
Well, this era is a little difficult because political cartoonists are dying. They're a dying breed because political cartooning is a dying breed because so much of video and audio has kind of taken that over. I don't know if it's fair to say that the last great black political cartoonist is Aaron McGruder. I mean, we can argue that point, but he might be. He might be. Because in terms of biting satire, I don't know anybody who has done better than him. Now, he's not the only active cartoonist. There's still people who have comic strips in newspapers today of black folks, but they don't have that biting political satire that we're talking about here in McGruder. But I'm glad I misread your question, Anarchist, because that got me an excuse to talk about Ollie Harrington. So Ollie Harrington goes to the left and stays there and even becomes an expat. Because a lot of these black writers and artists, they're in the black press and they report and draw and all these things during World War II. And then many of them decide to stay in Europe after World War II and become expats, like Ollie, what's his name? The great Afro writer whose name is also Ollie. Let me just take a quick sec. Oh, wait, Ollie Stewart. Ollie Stewart, who stays in Europe after World War II. Why come back to segregated America? Well, anyway, so there's a lot of radical fever going on in both radical organs and the black press. So how does the U.S. government respond to this? Well, they have a meeting, and one of the chief advisors to President Roosevelt says, well, we have to shut them down, try them for treason, and execute them.
Well, damn. That took a turn.
Now, Patrick Washburn does a great job in a book called A Question of Sedition, the black press during World War II, where the Roosevelt administration argues over, I was looking at what Q Anarchist was writing. I don't know if there's a connection. I don't know. That's a good question to ask. But to go back, there's a whole book written by written by this scholar about how the United States government argued over whether they should actually do that. And the Black press, represented by the Defender and by NNPA, a brand new organization to back then to represent Black newspaper publishers. Back then they were called the National Negro Publishers Association. Either that or the first version of it was called that. The history gets kind of fuzzy in my head now that I'm older. But the NNPA, regardless of whether it's Negro or newspaper, comes in and argues with the federal government over that. Like, wait a minute, you can't shut us down and do all of that. Surely there's some sort of compromise position that we can take. And so the compromise position is what's in that article. That the federal government gets access to the Black press to put its own propaganda in. Now, it just so happens at the time, somebody gets a letter, one of the Black newspapers, who is the Courier or the Defender, gets a letter from a soldier talking about, well, we need a double V campaign. We need to talk about victory for abroad and victory at home. And the Black press adopts it. And NPA and the Defender adopts it, and everybody adopts it. And that's how we get the double V campaign. So the Black press is all about compromise and a shying away from that militancy, slowly. But they do it during World War II. Now, it's slow because they still got to talk about all the Jim Crow stuff that's happening in the military. But to show you how radical the Black press used to be, the Afro-American used to write before Pearl Harbor editorials talking about how great the Japanese were. They were proud of the Japanese as a non-European race and how they could stand up against the whites, against the Europeans. They were writing this in their editorials. But Pearl Harbor stopped that. After Pearl Harbor, they said, okay, all of them, the Afro had an editorial after Pearl Harbor saying, now we're going to have to prove to this country that we deserve to be citizens. And so that's the beginning of the compromise that's accelerated through the sedition compromise and then the double V. And so we get now, by the end of World War II, if you compare it to pre-Pearl Harbor, a very compromised intellectual space. How compromised? Well, Powell gets elected to Congress, and Doxey Wilkerson and Marvel Cook decide to make the people's voice more communist. And so instead of showing these, illustrations about lynching for their cartoonists, we're talking about cartoons here today, they start showing illustrations of Black and white workers in solidarity with the term workers on cartoon. So what does Adam do? Adam immediately shuts down the people's voice because he does not want to get caught in the McCarthyite train that is now taken off from the station. And so the Black press then starts doing these major intellectual compromises where they show the radicals the door. And then it all becomes now about is Jim Crow and segregation and integration and desegregating public facilities and desegregating the army and desegregating the universities. Dr. Barr knows his history, but I love telling it. The university, when I went to work for the National NAACP and I said I was from the University of Maryland, College Park, the older Black people around me started to laugh. This was in the early 90s, early mid-90s. And they explained to me why they were laughing. And they said, well, you probably don't know the history of College Park. I said, no, I don't. Tell me. And they said, well, the University of Maryland College Park was one of the most segregated institutions in American society. And the president, Byrd, was like, a de facto, if not Klansman, de jure Klansmen. What's the difference between de jure and
de facto?
Right.
De jure is by law. De facto is by reality. Yeah.
And not a de facto Klansman and de jure. And by the way, they only just recently, a few years ago, took off Bird's name from the stadium.
Bird's name. I know. I was just there the other day and I was looking for it. Now, of course, it's something better. It's Xfinity.
Oh,
Xfinity. So we go from overt racists to covert corporate racist elites. It's beautiful. But yeah,
absolutely,
I mean,
So they explained to me that if you were a Negro and you applied to the University of Maryland College Park, this is post World War II. This is that tolerance period, right? Everybody's going to be tolerant. Well, nobody in College Park was tolerant. If you applied to University of Maryland College Park, you got a letter from them saying straight up, we do not admit Negroes, but we will pay for you to go to any college of your choice. State of Maryland will pay for it. And, I'm listening to their stories and I'm going, wow, that's crazy. But then I go read an Afro front page article about what? In 47, about a U.S. Army captain, black, as they would say in the black press, right? U.S. Army captain, black or Negro, right? Who applied to the University of Maryland College Park and got accepted by mistake because they thought he was white. And then when they found that he was black, he got the standard letter that the folks in the YTP told me about, saying, we don't accept Negroes, go where you want to go, we'll pay for it. So the black press becomes, again, in terms of comparison, conservative, because now it's about desegregating public facilities, desegregating the military, desegregating the colleges. And it becomes all about that and no longer about the Marxist perspective of, do we examine the whole structure? So that article fits exactly within the pattern of compromise that the black press went through during World War II.
So, and again, I just want to return to highlight the point that I'm working with at the moment, which is that the broader political goals of this country's ruling elite necessitated using black artists, journalists, entertainers, political leaders to promote pro-white, pro-capital, pro-US interests to the world. So, yeah. So, all right. So before the show, we talked about we might not need that much time. Now we're going to be running out of time at some point. So
right, because and in fact, my battery's going low, so I think I got another 15 minutes before I can no longer be on screen.
Are you serious?
So do you want to wrap? Do you want to do a quick version of the Schoolhouse Rock thing? Because we can do it quick. But I'm glad we had this talk though, because
I can't believe now you cut it that short. All right, go ahead, man.
I'm saying for me being on the visual, we can go as long as you want for me being on the visual. But let me get into this kind of Schoolhouse Rock thing and how Schoolhouse Rock connects to all of the things we've been talking about, right? Because believe it or not, all of these things connect.
And then specifically this episode that we were supposed to be looking at today and featuring the Money Rock episode.
The Money Rock, yes, the Money Rock. Right, Sugar Booger, I'm trying to avoid that. Absolutely. That's why I'm going to be off screen. Right? So you say what happened last time, right? That was funny.
What did happen last time?
Where I was basically like lying on my bed, right, talking to you guys, and yeah, everybody was clowning me out. Yeah, I'm just going to be off screen. But look,
back to the bed stream.
Yeah, there it is. Which what's going to happen? Like I said, this battery runs out.
No, we're saving that for your forthcoming OnlyFans page.
Yeah, we're gonna skip that. That's right. That's for OnlyFans. We're gonna skip that. So let me kind of give an outline of where a Schoolhouse Rock, and also, by the way, a Sesame Street would come out of, because Sesame Street and Schoolhouse Rock go back and forth in terms of winning the Child Emmys during the 70s for educational programming. And there's a reason why that that's happening. It's not just the quality of the two things which are quality. But let me do kind of this in general outline, and then we can talk about Money Rock. Okay, as I used to teach my college students, you know, and still do to a certain extent, music used to have to be produced in the home. And then technology comes where you can now get music outside of the home. And so people go outside of the home to get music. And then with the advent of recording, yes, absolutely. With the advent of recording, now music is a portable and reproducible experience, right? You can reproduce this recorded sound at any time. And then with the development of radio, you get a space for this music. And since America developed in a capitalistic way, unlike, let's say, the UK and other places, they decided that the broadcast spectrum was a capitalistic spectrum. And so radio is created here, commercial radio. And commercial radio is about what? It's about advertising artists, advertising albums, and the songs are advertising the artists and the album. And in between those advertisements, you get other advertisements. So it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, advertisements that you are what? Addicted to. Because of the power of sound, right? The manipulation of sound in a way that hits all the psychological parts of the brain that corresponds to that. When advertising is developed, advertising takes advantage of this idea that sound can be manipulated, can be portable, and can now be repeated. So this idea of using rhymes as a way to have the brain click and connect word and sound with meaning becomes more and more prevalent. And I didn't realize how slick this was until, you know, I was talking about Me TV Tunes the other day. I watched Me TV Tunes when it first came out, the first couple of days. And I was interested in how Underdog kept rhyming. I was like, Underdog rhymes, but not only did Underdog rhyme, he rhymed as a way of speaking, but also people in the show were rhyming and were repeating rhymes. And I said, I gotta look up who created Underdog. And I learned that advertising people created Underdog. They were looking for an advertiser for Quaker Oats. They decided to create a show. The advertisers themselves said, skip the middleman, we'll create the show. And so Underdog is replete with rhyming and with repetition. Now, when Sesame Street is created at a cocktail party by some white folks who are concerned about Black and Puerto Rican, back then it was just Black and Puerto Rican. There were no other races, right? Black and Puerto Rican children don't have the right reading scores. They don't have this, they don't have that. They don't have, you know, Head Start, by the way, was just an idea at that point that was being developed, right? So we need to have a kind of a television equivalent of Head Start, right? They do the research, they do the psychological research in terms of child development, but they also do research on what? On what children connect with. And one of the things they learned was that children connect with advertising. Because by the time Sesame Street is created in 1969, kids have had more than a decade of advertising on television, particularly animated advertising on television. So when Sesame Street is created, it goes back and forth between live action segments and these very short animated segments, sometimes 1, 2, 3 minutes long, of a letter or a number. And those those small animated spots are in the Sesame Street lingo called advertisements. They use the same principles that Madison Avenue uses in the 2 and 3 minute shorts. And through repetition, children learn the letters and their numbers. And this is how Sesame Street becomes a phenomenon, because they balance out the live action with these animated, what they call commercials. So children who are already being bombarded with animated commercials that simulate cartoons, the cartoons that they're watching now on television that were originally from the theater, and we saw what some of those were in part 2. So in between those cartoons, you get these animated cartoons of people selling products. And so the foundation of Sesame Street is to use those exact techniques to sell the letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G, numbers. Repetition. Bombardment. Rhyming. It's all there. So one day, it's all around the same time, an advertising executive notices that his 6-year-old kid doesn't know his multiplication tables, but knows the words of every single song on the radio. A radio, by the way, that again has been prepped, that has prepped the brain through stimulating the nervous system, rhyming, music, repetition. And so he's thinking, well, there's got to be a way to make the multiplication table cool and rhymable. And so he creates something called multiplication rock. Now, ABC is becoming the top Saturday morning place for kids. And so the young executive who's in charge of Saturday morning does something unprecedented. He tells all of the production companies that you have to cut all your cartoons by 2 minutes, because we're going to air this thing that advertising people created on the multiplication tables. And he makes everybody, Hanna-Barbera, everybody, Looney Tunes, everybody, they cut 2. You're not going to air an ABC if you're not going to cut the 2 minutes out. And multiplication rock is a huge hit. My mother bought me the album when I was a small child, right? Because Sesame Street and I are the same age. That means I would have been around 5 when multiplication rock premiered. Huge hit for ABC. So ABC now becomes known as a network of the Super Friends, Multiplication Rock, and Scooby-Doo. All right, now we're talking real Gen X stuff here now, right? So because that's a hit, they expanded. They expanded into language. They expanded into American history, which we will not deal with here. Wow, American history had some problems. And they expanded it into science. And so all throughout the 70s, multiplication rock became Schoolhouse Rock, which was multiplication rock, America Rock, which was the history stuff that we won't talk about, grammar rock, and science rock. And these are songs that, if you're Gen X, I can play you any one of these songs and you will start singing it. It's embedded in your head. Because everybody watched ABC, everybody watched Scooby-Doo, Super Friends, and everybody watched Schoolhouse Rock. So Schoolhouse Rock and Sesame Street go back and forth in terms of the awards and the accolades, both in their successful use of advertising techniques. The same propaganda advertising techniques that Dr. Balls talked about in part 1 and part 2. But jazzed up, used with the music format, which creates rhyming and manipulation of sound in ways that are pleasurable to the nervous system so that you remember it. Sugar Booger, Multiplication Rock was the first one. You do remember it. If we could play one right now, you would absolutely remember it. It was the first one, though, so you may not be as old as Dr. Ball or I. Conjunction, junction, what's your function? Right. Working out words and phrases and clauses. See that? It's automatic. I didn't even have to think about it. Right? I didn't have to think about it. It's right there. It's right there in my head. Right? Because I never learned that multiplication table that we had in school. I didn't have to. I sang it. So I remember as a kid doing tests, singing to myself to remember, okay, that's 49.
All right, so before your battery dies,
well, my battery died.
We talked about talking about Money Rock.
Now, Money Rock was done in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to give you a little bit of history, Schoolhouse Rock ran from 1973 all the way up until about 1983, 1984. They were trying to be current. So for some reason, they dropped the format and replaced it with a 2-minute cartoon called Scooter and Mr. Chips, Scooter, Computer, and Mr. Chips, which was about computing because that was becoming the new thing. And then the whole thing got dropped because Mary Lou Retton became a big star. And then there was the 3 minutes went to Mary Lou Retton talking about health and wellness, right? They brought Schoolhouse Rock back in the 90s with some new episodes of Grammar Rock and with this Money Rock. And Money Rock is devoted to financial literacy. So what you have there is dollars and cents, which is about taking a loan out of the bank and depositing money.
She's singing on a farm.
Right.
But she knows if she wants to go far and have a career, she needs equipment. So to get mics and equipment, she needs a loan.
Right.
Where she can go to the bank and get a loan.
Right.
And then she can learn about she learns about putting money, or is this where she learns about either that or she saves money in her account, or maybe it's both. So it's a little bit about loans, interest, savings accounts.
Right.
And then ultimately keeping the economy going, because of course the goal is to buy something and support business, and then she can go off and have a career.
Right.
So it's
and the cartoon ends with a little bit of irony because she buys all the equipment, but she doesn't have a plug.
Right. Which should be some sort of political statement, but
right, you would think so, right?
You know.
Then we get to
being frugal. $7.50 a week. Now, what I thought this was going to be perfect for, because I thought it was going to say this was $7.50 as a minimum wage, which is basically where it still is. But but
that's a child's allowance.
It's a weekly allowance, just teaching you how to save. But it's again, I took it as not just teaching children how to be responsible financially, but I took it as yet another, if you're poor, you just need to budget better and you can make it. You don't have to complain. We definitely don't have to redistribute wealth. Inequality is not a problem. You just need to think like this little kid and stretch your $7.50 a week.
And as Dr. Boy is outlining, these are the good ones. See, we're going to get to the controversial ones as we go along because these get worse.
Yeah, I mean, so then this one is where we see our first number 3. I'm just going in order of the show.
Where the money goes, that's parents explaining to their kids that if you want to go do something that you want to do, we're gonna have to figure out how to tighten our belt.
And so what did I put in my note? Black savings and financial literacy. That's right. So right. You and you're gonna have to find ways to not cost the house so much money. And it's kind of messed up because you're telling a kid, you're the reason why we don't have any money.
Yep.
So if you would talk less on the phone, take shorter showers, eat less, have the lights on less, if we didn't have to pay for your food or whatever, it's like damn.
Right.
Like you're telling the kid we're poor because of me. It's my fault. I just got
and clearly these people are house poor, right? Because the guys dressing well, they look like they're in a nice house, so they're house poor.
Right. Well, there are no bad neighborhoods, in the United States.
Right.
So
now this is the Schoolhouse Rock intro that they made in the 90s when they brought the cartoon back.
Oh, okay, I see. And this next episode was the Tax Man, right? This is the
There's Schoolhouse Rocky, which did not exist in the 70s. They made him up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then the funny thing about the Tax Man is that that cartoon openly says that people who complain about their taxes are just wrong.
Yeah.
And taxes are really not only a good thing, but a fun thing.
And a fun thing, and you can learn about what's tax deductible, and of course it's good for you, not for corporations, not for the elite transferring their wealth through inheritance. No. Right. You, the average person, should be happy to pay your taxes. And again, it's kind of like what I was saying in the first one. They appeal to collectivism to defend private individual interests. It's really a shady kind of thing, because they're saying your taxes help everybody, including yourself. They pave the streets, they get the police and the firefighters, you get whatever but so you should want to pay your taxes, because they know they're not going to pay their taxes, and they don't want you asking questions about so I just it was just
cartoons about why the rich don't pay taxes, right?
No. It's just telling you to do your civic duty and don't complain. And I was just like, wow, that's slick,
right?
Now these are not as overt as I think those ones in the 50s. They're a little more. These at least, this money was a little more like you don't get any overt. The commies are coming. And the red wave is coming to get you. If the unions are coming to get you, the shadowy black workers are coming to get you. They don't quite go that hard with it, but that's sort of what makes it more sophisticated and in some ways more complicated and by today more difficult to suss out.
But the visuals are clear, and the tension, like the tension that is the plot of these, are very clear. So, for instance, this one, Walking on Wall Street, that's about being cool, right? You could tell this one done after the 80s and 90s, people making a lot of money. Let's talk about stock markets. This is when the stock market was beginning to explode under Clinton.
Right.
It's about hey, this is the cool thing to do, and you should want to be in it.
It's definitely telling you to invest, and they even use the phrase that you hear on financial literacy podcasts. The one in particular was dollar cost averaging, which is basically to invest patiently and soberly to make sure that you're doing the best you can to buy low and sell high, and to not overextend yourself. So it's telling you to invest, but then it does that thing that is really more ramped up today of saying, don't do too much, because there is some risk, and we don't want you to think that, when you lose all your money, that it's our fault. So they're telling you,
and the goal is to get your piece of the pie.
Right.
And they say that.
And so the best part of you going off camera is that it sounds like you're finally using the mic that some wonderful beneficent soul sent you so that you could sound good on these podcasts. I'm just throwing that out there.
The mic is now closer. I've used it the entire time, but the mic.
Okay, just checking. Closer. Okay, so that's fine. We have to suffer without your visage, but we get So
let me plug this computer in so that we can continue, because these later ones are the ones I really like, because I think they get really, really blatant.
All right. So
So when we get to the next one, which is
this for that.
Now this one
the history of money. This was currency. Yep.
And look at how Neanderthal looking this guy is, who's talking about bartering, right? So they're already giving you the visual. You don't want to barter.
So the whole thing is about how bartering. Well, the whole point of the video is that they want to pay tribute to the barter system. So it begins and ends by saying it all started with the barter system, and we want to pay tribute to it. But the reason that it doesn't work is because the transfer of all these other things that have been bartered historically is too much. So you don't want to be lugging cows everywhere. You don't want to be lugging a whole bunch of cowrie shells everywhere. So the best thing to do is to have currency, because you can represent all of these things with something smaller, more easily transferable. And but yeah, to your point, as history marches on, they suggest this is that part of that linear advance of human history, progress of human history, that as the conquistadors show up, which is of course a good thing, you get more and more fiat currency, and how much better it is, and how much it more easily handles business and allows for business to transact. But then it ends by just giving this little shout out back to the original guy with his stone or whatever, and saying, it did all start with the barter system, but haven't we advanced? Look how far we've come to where we now have this.
It's better, and they literally say it's smarter.
It's smarter. That's right.
You see the evolution of the guy going from, medieval.
That's right.
All the way up to where he is now with the tie and everything.
More
and that history just mirrors. It just so happens that history mirrors the history of colonialism.
Right.
That's
well, they leave and they leave that part out. They leave the part out about currency's relationship to imperialism. They leave out the part about the certainly the more modern stuff that would have the digitization and the ability to create out of nothing, all the horrors that have emerged post this moment is not, obviously could not have been thought of at the time, but they should have seen enough even in the 90s when this was being created that we've already had several crashes at that point. You have the advent and the development of all these new mechanisms or evolving mechanisms of derivatives and all this other kind of stuff. All of that gets left out. And of course, the fundamental point, going back to Adam Smith, which is that money was created to force exchange between people who, or well, I guess he would have said more something, allow exchange between people who didn't have anything to barter. So we could get to the point where you could promise this fiat currency in exchange for nothing except the promise of access to maybe resources or access to the protection of the United States and so on and so forth. But all that gets left out to just
a piece of paper that represents a piece of gold somewhere that you'll never see. And
that you'll never see. That's right. Exactly. So it's
and again, Schoolhouse Rock leaving out this history, of course, is not unusual, because they have the whole America Rock that
right
founding of the United States and all of that, and barely deals with the Indian. Forget about slavery. Slavery is not even mentioned.
Now, what I thought was interesting about this next one on the Tyrannosaurus debt,
right?
Talking about the federal debt, is that so it of course leaves out all the discussion about how federal debt is not to be understood the way household debt is to be understood. That that debt at the federal level, particularly with a country like this, doesn't mean what it means when you and I are in debt. I don't pretend to be an expert in all of that. So a lot of the details for that are beyond my immediate recall, but that's basically the reality, that the debt the United States has is not some major lag on its ability to do anything. So that's one thing I thought was interesting that they leave out. But the real thing that I thought was interesting in this video is that they start the history of the federal debt by attaching it to what was left over after the Revolutionary War, that the debt was developed out of freeing ourselves, quotes, air quotes, of course,
right.
from the British.
Right.
And it's almost, it just felt like, I was kind of, the way it was presented almost felt as if they're on the one hand saying, yeah, we have this debt and it's constantly here. It always needs to be fed. It's constantly increasing, but it's something that was sort of baked in from the beginning that we've still never paid off, and is in somehow something. It almost felt like they were saying that you should sort of be grateful to, or that you're sort of responsible for, not grateful for, but you're sort of responsible for that even that you're, it's almost like I can't help but put it in this way, but it almost feels like the whole original sin, that you're born with this original sin that you can really never overcome, but you should always attempt to overcome it by being obedient and prayerful to this larger deity. So I don't know. I couldn't really figure it out. I watched it a couple times. I wrote a couple of notes down, but that was basically, so I wasn't really sure what they were just trying to say, other than maybe to justify why the state, you can't expect much from the state because it's in constant debt, and it's something that has been baked in from the beginning. I don't know. What did you think about that?
I'm really glad you brought this up, because see, I thought this one maybe was the most sinister of all of them. And I want to tell you why. Because if you notice, they use the same art structure, the same singer, and the same format as I'm Just a Bill, their most famous Schoolhouse Rock. Or if not the same singer, at least the same body of singer, just the same visual style. And I stopped taking the national debt seriously, because the only people who ever brought up the national debt were like Fox News and the Republicans, and only when it's in power. Whenever a Democrat is in office. Oh, by the way, I hate to date this broadcast, but Alan Lichtman has just come out this morning with his verdict. Kamala's going to win.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Alan Lichtman came out about an hour before he went on air.
And his predictions, what's is he's got a stellar record?
9 out of 10, but he said it's 10 out of 10, but because he doesn't count 2000, because 2000 was done by the Supreme Court. But Alan Lichtman has this thing called Keys to the White House. And depending on what those keys say and what's happening and how what's going on in society matches those keys, he has predicted 9 out of the last 10 presidencies. Excuse me. So this morning, he has predicted that Kamala Harris is going to win.
All right, you heard it here first, folks.
So what that means is that Fox News is going to put up a huge... I love it. That Fox News is going to put up a huge billboard outside of Fox News. And you know what it's going to say? It's going to say national debt. And whenever Fox News Sunday airs, they're going to cut to it. Because every time there's a Democratic president, that's what they do. They cut to it. And they're going to show you the national debt. And the national debt is going to become a huge issue.
And that's and the national debt, and their argument is always, of course, why you can't have Social Security and you shouldn't have health care and you shouldn't have a pension plan and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
Because we just can't afford it. We can only afford wars and to replenish the rich during a COVID pandemic.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. That's why I thought the whole thing was kind of strange the way they were approaching it. Right. And they're again with the start of we got this from the Revolutionary War, like what I mean, like
always had it. Yeah, we've always had it.
We had to free the colonies, and in the process, that just what I mean, just got us sort of stuck on some stuff, and I don't know, it was odd. So I appreciate what you had to say about it, and. All right, so there was one more about checkbook, the checks in the mail, and all I really had from this was that it was encouraging people to use checks and checkbooks. It was encouraging people to, of course, that means you have to have a bank account, and it's another way. It's promoting, because the whole thing is about. The way they promote the value of having a checkbook is that you can pay your bills easier. And you can, you don't have to lug a bunch of money around, and you can just pay your bills and use your bank statement to, so it was just it seemed like another way of getting people to engage with the banking system, and to pay your bills, which is, of course, important. But that was really all I got from it. It didn't seem to be, and that, in a way, a very subtle form of, but an important form that I still see playing out today in the form of this financial literacy, because it does still have that subtle undertone of, if you're late, if you overdraft, if you don't have money to pay a bill, it's your fault. It's
right.
This is look, we've done everything in this wonderful capitalism to ease the process for you. Now you don't have to lug a bunch of
overlay. That's the overlay of all of Money Rock. So you just described Money Rock. That's the overlay. We're going to show you this, but if you mess it up, it's your fault. It's not the system's fault. It's not America's fault, because this is a great system.
It's a great system, and we've provided
part of a great country.
Great country, and all you need to do is pay your bills on time. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you know what I'm saying, and balance your checkbook.
And again, folks, I want to emphasize, the guy who forced all of the cartoon companies to cut 2 minutes from their shows to do this back in the 70s, he was rewarded with becoming head of Disney, Michael Eisner.
Wow.
It was Michael Eisner who was the young executive that forced this on the Saturday morning. Forced it.
And then Michael Eisner goes on to Disney.
And Disney buys everything. ABC, Marvel, Star Wars.
Well, before all of that, I mean, even before all of that, Disney is already an empire that because he usher in like a golden era? Isn't he credited with sort of that whole thing of a new golden era? And
he congratulated himself by being the host of the new edition of The Wonderful World of Disney. He took over Walt Disney's place as the new host. That's how hardcore he was.
So, he's just transferring old skills, which is another sort of feature of this little series we've been doing here. On these capitalist cartoons,
right?
So that's perfect. Actually, that's perfect. So I was actually trying to quickly do something here to fix the visual, but let's see if I don't think it's going to work the way I had hoped. But either way, okay. Right. So just to wrap it back up, my point, my interest in this is, of course, again, the dissemination of white capitalist corporate ideas and how those ideas become disseminated and transferred and rebranded as, in this case, youthful in terms of school rock, or specifically Black targeted messaging. Now that didn't work. I had a whole plan for putting a little image of Todd up there, but I didn't quite get there.
I mean, it's all very well done.
I know what I did wrong. Okay, I got it.
It's very well done, and it's done during a period in which, see, Schoolhouse Rock and Sesame Street air during a time in which there's only a 5-channel universe. There's only 3 networks, 2 independent channels, and maybe, depending on, thank you, that'll work. And depending on how well you handle the other dial, what was that, the UHF dial or the other dial? You could get like another small little independent channel, right? So at night, we only had 6 channels, right? And this was during a period of time in which, okay, I love that. We should keep that. This was a period of time in which, you know, like 90%. Can't you move me to the side?
I can't move the picture. That StreamYard is limited. So I'm kind of stuck. But I got another one. I got another idea. Keep going. I got another idea.
While Dr. Ball is clowning me through visual. This was a period of time in which over 75% of American households, more than 90% of American households had televisions. So the television was becoming an essential appliance, the same way the refrigerator was becoming the essential appliance in the 50s, because the refrigerator replaced the icebox. And it allowed food to be preserved. Okay, that's perfect. Thank you. And allowed food to be preserved. And I am in correct proportion to Dr. Ball. I just want to say in terms of Dr. Ball's prominence and eminence.
No.
I am in the correct proportion.
No. That's only because it's a bad image. So it's just
now it's too big. I liked it better when it was smaller. But seriously, this was also a period of time in which, okay, let's say out of those 90% of people that had televisions, right? 75%, at least 75% was watching one of the 3 networks. This is why All in the Family became such a huge hit, for instance, because here Norman Lear's trying to do an anti-racist, anti-system sitcom. But because of the power of the sitcom and how beloved the sitcom is and how programmed the audience was to accept the sitcom, Archie Bunker, instead of becoming the bad character, because Archie Bunker represents Norman Lear's father, as we know. Those discussions between Meathead and Archie are discussions Norman Lear had with his father. But Archie becomes this beloved character because of the power of television, right? Mary Tyler Moore, the show she had, was very, very inspirational to a young Oprah Winfrey, who was beginning her broadcast career during those years. And you can see on YouTube where Mary Tyler Moore surprises Oprah Winfrey, and she just freaks out, right? Yeah, she freaks out. Just go on YouTube and type in Mary Tyler Moore, Oprah Winfrey. Just getting her on audio freaks her out. But then later on, during an anniversary show, her producer surprised her, and Mary Tyler Moore walks out. And she loses it and starts crying and all of that, and hugs her and talks about how much Mary Tyler Moore meant to her, the show. I mean, but that's the psychological connection we have to this television stuff, right? So when we're talking about kids who are given all of these Saturday morning cartoons and are being prepped both in public commercial television and public television, non-commercial television, being prepped for advertising that they're already susceptible to in the most powerful medium at that moment, in the most households, where everybody's watching television. Saturday morning television is huge. There used to be whole preview shows about what was going to be the new Saturday morning cartoons. They were network shows because they brought in so many dollars. And so here's ABC and PBS doing something good by teaching America's young people, but by doing it through the exact propaganda techniques that are used to make sure they're consumers.
Wow. Well, listen, man, let me know when you want to come back and do another one.
I love this. I might not be on camera anymore. We might just do it this way because
this is how we're going to do it.
I love this. Look, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this. As I tell people, as I've told people now for years, this is kind of a version of what it's like when Dr. Ball and I hang out, right? This is like a version of it, right? Although it's become more serious as we've gotten older because we have more grudges, right?
That's really the only difference is there's more complaining, a few more maybe more cuss words here and there, exactly. Some pointed criticism. But real quick, some pointed uncriticism. I want to thank ZZ Lion for these super chats. I know it's not like he just likes supporting revolutionary YouTuber. Appreciate the support.
Thank you.
And really, if you can't support materially as we try to rebuild iMiXWHATiLiKE over here, it's fine. Just like, share, subscribe, and encourage others to join and check out the work. Now, so when do I do a Q&A? Do you mean just in general? I mean, I feel like I do Q. Are you trying to? Yeah. Are you asking questions about this right now? In which case, we can do that now. We can do that.
I got time.
And thank you, Sugar Booger. Thank you very much. So yeah, and if you want, are you saying you want the link to come on the screen here and join us, or what is it that you're looking for? Or you want time to just generally criticize me or whatever? I don't know. Like
and me too.
So real quick, what about this question here that Nello asked earlier about the Boondocks? Maybe we should come back and do something specific to that.
Do you want to talk about the Boondocks?
Not now, because I am running out of time and energy.
Okay.
But I would like to set up a time to specifically do that. So I would like some time to revisit some things, and but yeah, I would like to. I mean,
to talk about the Boondocks, we really can't talk about the Boondocks without talking about the cultural impact of Doonesbury.
All right, we'll just leave that there for the tease, and we'll.
And we can think about a part 4 where we can talk about Doonesbury and the Boondocks, because the Boondocks takes Doonesbury and just crushes it and puts it not only in hip hop flavor, but makes it more left, more contradictory. But Doonesbury actually sets the standard for what PJs.
Well, the Boondocks, and specifically the comic. We're talking about the comic is less, not the cartoon. We would have to separate the conversations for the cartoon.
The cartoon is taking the base of the comic and expanding it into other areas and done with a different narrative. The narrative is very different from the cartoon and the comic strip. But we would have to talk about
Netflix in a World War II documentary about Black women. I haven't seen that, but
I did mention that Oprah's doing this new film on the Black women who had to sort the mail in Europe during World War II, The Wax. I don't know when that's coming out, but we talked about that before.
This is kind of funny. If you really do run out of camera or battery.
Yeah, I love it.
This is kind of funny. This is funny.
Keep that as a standby. I love it so much. Now let me tell you the inside joke of this. Can I tell you about the inside joke of this photo before we go?
Yeah.
The inside joke in this photo. My nephew took that photo with me. My oldest nephew, who's a filmmaker, he took that photo with me. I'm sitting in South Orange, New Jersey, in like their kind of center square, taking that photo. Now here's the joke. All right, you see I'm wearing a Luke Cage Hero for Hire. Now Luke Cage is the character that Stan Lee and a bunch of the young hippie people at Marvel created after coming back from seeing Shaft. They wanted a Shaft type character, and they created Luke Cage, and they took so little time to create him. Even the dress he's wearing, a yellow shirt and blue jeans. If you watch Shaft, there's a point where he's dressed in a yellow shirt and blue jeans. So even the visual, they didn't take a lot of time to think about. But I'm wearing that shirt, but I'm holding a copy of something called Dark Kitty. Now, Dark Kitty is a parody issue of a comic book called Quantum and Woody, which is like this humorous superhero book. And the writer and creator of Quantum and Woody is Christopher Priest, who was the first Black editor at Marvel and was the first Black writer for Black Panther. So in this issue of Quantum and Woody, he's parodying not only Black Panther, but he's parodying his own run of Black Panther. He's clowning his own run and clowning the way he does Black Panther in that book.
Wow.
So I took that picture when I was promoting my Black Panther book, and that's like a deep inside joke.
Well, I appreciate that. I love the background on that.
Sure.
And I can't, now that I look at the screen, it's hilarious.
No, I love it. I love it so much. I love it so much. Look, everybody, Dr. Paul is to go. He's a very important man. He has things to do.
No. But I do have a meeting, and
you have a meeting. You have a meeting.
Yeah,
I want you to go to that
I've
meeting.
been trying to avoid them, but they found me.
I want you to go to that meeting and have a great meeting. Everybody, we'll talk about a part 4. But again, I mean, Doonesbury really set the standard. And Doonesbury was very anti-status quo in his day. And we could talk about how Doonesbury has gotten more conservative, because it definitely has. It went from being a virulent anti-war strip to now being a pro-soldier strip. And so, all right.
Well, and is it the Doonesbury guy, the one that went on in Twitter and said black people are terrible? Something, he had a little racist rant.
That's
Wasn't that
Dilbert.
him?
No, that's Dilbert.
Oh, Dilbert. Oh, my bad.
Yeah, that's Dilbert. Yeah,
my bad. Whatever.
Doonesbury was the white hippie who started this comic strip in Yale and never had a job since.
All right, but again, we'll come back to that. We'll come back. We'll do all the Boondocks and Doonesbury and whatever else.
Goodbye, everybody. This was fun.
Peace, everybody, if you're willing to fight for it. Thanks again to as Fred Hampton used to say, thanks again to Dr. Todd Stephen Burroughs. Links to most of what we were talking about is already in the show description, and more to come. Please do like, share, subscribe. Please consider joining the platform and encouraging others to join you. Other than that, catch you next time here at wait. No, I almost forgot something, and I did forget something, and it'll stay forgotten. Anyway. Catch you next time right here at
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
What do you sacrifice? Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, that set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.